At the beginning of last year, my hopes were incredibly high. Thanks to Republican obstruction and the fiasco of the Bush era, along with a rising millennial population, with increasing progressive values, I thought we would never have to worry about another Republican president until the mid-2020s, when they finally fixed their party. I even had this silly notion that Obama was the equivalent of the first half of FDR's presidency, with a ton of opposition and gridlock. They both were having to pull us out of a massive depression, and weren't able to get much done for the first two terms. He did most of his major stuff in his third and fourth term. I honestly thought we would have another two-term Democratic president, then maybe a one-term president like Truman, and a super moderate Republican would finally be able to win, like Ike. However, there was another historical pattern I was unaware of that went down 12 years before FDR, which shows that you can predict about jack squat. While Obama does share a lot with FDR, the public mood is much more like the public around the time of Woodrow Wilson. For one thing, progressive ideas he wasn't convinced on happened to get forced on him by public to change. Much like gay rights, the vote for women was passed near the end of Wilson's term. A man by the name of Eugene Debs began running for president as the Socialist Party leader in 1904. He was also a labor organizer, which put him at odds with many in the government at the time. He ran pretty much every election like a Ralph Nader figure, but with a Bernie Sanders ideal and appeal. Woodrow Wilson actually had him in prison for telling people to resist the draft in World War I, and he ran for president from prison in 1920. While America was becoming a lot more progressive at the time, Debs ended up splitting the vote with establishment Democrat James Cox for the really legitimate anger of imprisoning the opposition, and instead, wealthy, nationalistic, backwards-looking, corrupt, uber-capitalist, inept Warren G. Harding ended up winning, who promised a return to normalcy, or as we call it, the good old days. He is listed by almost every historian as the worst president in our history, and if you want to know more, Steve Shives recently made a video on him. Link is in the below bar. Sadly, because the vote was split between two more progressive factions, just like in 2016, though in 2016 more people just ended up staying home because their candidate didn't win in the primary, the most horrible candidate in history won, and Trump is currently giving Harding a massive run for his money with infinitely more scandal, conflicts of interest, and flouting of the Constitution even before taking office than Harding could have in his entire 2 years, while removing a ton of rights for us systematically and moving us closer every day to true fascism. Thanks to our damaged two-party system and the inability for most people who agree on 85 to 95% of things to get together and fight a common enemy, we may very well end up repeating this path, if we can't compromise like adults. Bernie just lost the primary, though the party was biased against him, with zero evidence of rigging anything because the state counts the freaking votes. Debs was imprisoned by the opposition. The comparison is not even close. If things go the way history goes, Trump will have 2 years in office, probably through impeachment, and we will have Pence to replace him as Calvin Coolidge did, who slashed regulation just as much. This created the Roaring Twenties, and you can already see the stock market soaring as they continue to strip workers' rights left and right, and ridiculously more and more income inequality and work shortages as the robot revolution advances further. For 12 years, we will have Republicans who run our nation and the economy into the ground, making the Great Recession Obama had to pull us out of look like an economic boom. The Democratic Party will have changed by then, and the progressive seeds laid by Bernie, just like Debs, will lead to the next FDR, but the process will be terrible and painful for everyone involved, assuming we don't end up going down a different path that ends us up where Russia is right now. These are possible outcomes. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes. It may end up completely different, and hopefully it will. 2 ways we can fix this is to first off, unify as a party, and the people in the party learning how compromise actually works, and seeing the big picture and the greater good, even though they may disagree on 10% of the issues. And that is how this system works. It's a crappy system, but we have to accept it and work with it. The other way is to initiate ranked choice voting so the system doesn't have to be that way, and you can vote your conscience without screwing over the nation by letting the greater of two evils win. In the next week, I am meeting for the first time with my new group called Repairing Our Elections Northern Virginia. Our state election is happening this year, and if we can get bugs into the ears of the flood of new candidates trying to run to put ranked choice voting on the platform before they get into power, we could have a real shot of changing our electoral system, and all the voters I've talked to on every side of the political debate thinks ranked choice voting is a wonderful idea. On top of that, Virginia already had a Republican representative try to pass ranked choice voting in committee. Only the majority parties in power don't like it. Next week, I will be putting out a video on how you too can start a chapter and the materials I will be using. These materials were designed the year I started and ran Repairing Our Elections Indianapolis that had an impact on getting a bill introduced but died in committee. The material and advice is free to start your own campaign. You have the choice of voting for the lesser of two perceived evils or not voting, allowing the massively greater of two evils in. Or you can try this. I recommend both, but the first is the most important. Either way, you have to fight the greater evil, even if at the moment it feels like you're compromising your values by compromising with a party that mostly agrees with you.